All right, everybody. So we are going to go over the swing of Matthew Fitzpatrick in our next edition of Tour Player Analysis. This seems fitting because he's the reigning U.S. Open winner, and obviously that major is coming up soon. So Matthew has one of the more unique moves in golf, despite obviously being a very skilled golfer who is top 10 in the world rankings, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously just won a Hilton Head, just an elite golfer. So you can see here, he's somebody who has a very strong grip. So he's always going to have the club face in a pretty strong position. But what's most notable here, obviously, is the fact that he doesn't have a ton of wrist set early into his backswing, which causes the club to get very inside as he rotates, right? As soon as he starts to pull his hips even a little bit behind him, the hands are going to start to work around him, so his lead arm's a little bit more in at this point. And obviously, without the wrist set, the club just gets pulled way inside. So as we continue going up, you'll see that trend continue. So hands are very inside and across his chest. And the shaft is obviously very, very flat at this point, as you can see, because of that lack of wrist hinge, right? He's somebody who reacts a little differently to the top than most amateurs would. Most amateurs, what you see is when they pull that club inside, usually there will be some form of a late hinging happening or a reaction from the trail arm, some element of like a flying elbow, internal shoulder rotation, which pushes the shaft very across the line, right? Very flat, very inside, and then very up and across is a common theme with recreational golfers. That is certainly not the case with Matthew, right? What you'll see in his case is he retains a ton of external rotation on this trail shoulder joint. You can see that just through the very vertical trail arm and the fact that that elbow joint stays in front of him quite well. But when you do that with such a flat backswing, this is going to cause the shaft to obviously stay very, very flat. So near the top of his backswing, he gets the shaft in a very, very laid off position here, right? And something that is quite uncommon for most golfers. Certainly at the highest level. Now, what you'll see from here, which is no different than what we come across with many golfers who get too laid off, is there is a relatively big steepening move happening in transition. So he's not somebody who necessarily shallows the club extremely well. He has a lot of hand depth to offset the steepness, but by all accounts, his shaft is certainly getting more vertical into your downswing, right? And you can kind of see that there. Now, like I said, the only reason why the shaft, in theory, stays into a shallow position and never steepens too much, despite being super laid off at the top, is because of the hand depth. Essentially, if you took the same pattern of him being laid off, but you gave him an arm plane that was more upright, the steepening effect would be twice as significant, and the shaft would be much more, vertical coming down in front of his body. He is somebody who has a decent amount of hip turn, which in my opinion has actually increased through his speed work that he's done. And the fact that he gets his arms, in a flatter position and more over the heels of his feet, this actually helps him. Where despite the fact that the shaft actually steepens into the downswing, which is pretty noticeable here, he retains more hand depth than what you will see from some other golfers, and that actually helps him to keep the club in a shallow position. And so you can actually see that there. And then obviously ton of rotation combined with the steepening effect, right? He gets his hands back out in front of him really nicely. And by all accounts, actually gets into a phenomenal position coming down, right? Something that you probably wouldn't expect just given how laid off he is at the top, but he actually makes it work extremely well. And then from here, obviously, Clubhead continues to work in front of him. He continues to rotate extremely well. Super good bend here on that trail arm. Obviously, pelvis is in a pretty good spot. His lead hip is not elevating too fast. Lead shoulder is not elevating too fast. A lot of hip rotation. Chest is slightly open at impact as well. You can kind of see that with the shoulder line here. And then obviously, pretty good release pattern. Maybe a little bit more releasing or forearm rotation through the ball than some others. A lot of that has to do with his reaction to the steepening. So overall, a really good move. I mean, his release pattern is really solid, nice and flat and around them. And in fact, given the amount of side bend and how vertical his shoulders are, you would probably expect a little bit more of a vertical release, but he actually manages it really well and doesn't really have too much of a flippiness at the bottom. So yeah, by all accounts, a little bit more of a unique pattern, but like I said, the key component here and what really makes his swing work the best is the fact that his hands are over the heels of his feet. You take this exact same pattern and you get his arm plane a little too upright and the whole swing would fall apart because of the steepening move. But because he's got the hands a little bit more around him, into his backswing and he actually retains the hand depth there, it actually offsets the steepening effect quite nicely and it neutralizes it so that he can actually keep the club in a pretty shallow position coming down.